Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Hope everyone has been staying cool out there this week. We'll have Al Dutcher here later on in the show to talk weather, but until then, lots of other great information for you this week. And we're starting off this week's broadcast from keeping up with your personal finances to staying informed on any new regulations. So many things go into making the best decisions for a farming operation. Market Journal's Bill Dodd recently spoke with Tina Barrett, Director of Nebraska Farm Business, to get her perspective on what farmers and ranchers should be paying attention to now in order to make the most informed decisions possible.
Over the last 15 years, the farm economy has seen some extreme ups and downs. Sometimes it can be hard to keep up with the ever-evolving changes to agriculture. When it comes to setting your operation up for sustainability, however, one of the best things you can do is be prepared and flexible.
I just think it's really important that you're prepared for just about anything as you're sitting out on the farm, because we don't know if prices are going to jump, up in rapid fashion or if they're going to go down the limit. Being prepared to take advantage of those opportunities is going to be really important. And we're seeing that both on the commodity side as well as the input side. And just having that ability to know what your numbers are so that you can make decisions as those ups and downs come at the farm, and you're prepared to work with those.
When it comes to being prepared, having a good grasp on net farm income trends over the last decade could be a beneficial aspect to tie into your decision-making process.
Well, we saw that huge run up in the late 2007, 2010, really peaking in 2012 with the drought, and then it just kind of fell out. And, we really saw a lot of farms struggle, especially with liquidity through that time. The decisions that were made in those late years in that run up to defer taxes and, buy more equipment and really get out of some of those short-term problems caused some long-term issues through that downtime when we were in that period where prices weren't as good. We were still trying to make payments on those purchases that we've already written off. So we saw a lot of struggling, and that seemed to be across the board, whether we were talking about crops, livestock, or anything. But those operations that were not prepared during those times and didn't make any changes really were struggling, and probably would have saw a lot more bankruptcies if 2020 hadn't ended up being the way it was. So.
Arguably, one of the biggest lessons learned in the 1980s was to protect net worth and avoid overinflation with increasing land values. However, Tina tells me one of the biggest lessons over the last decade has been for producers to protect liquidity.
And that maybe is something we didn't do very well. We saw liquidity just go through the roof when prices were high and profitability was up there. But that fell pretty quickly. I sometimes we'll talk about our liquidity kind of in relationship to like our heart rate or our breathing rates. Those things that change very quickly over, and going to fluctuate. Where that net worth or that solvency number is kind of more like a cholesterol level, and it takes longer to move. So, it's not something that we want to panic about having your liquidity go down, but we need to pay attention to it and make sure that we're protecting that when things are good, like we're seeing right now, and not doing things that are going to harm that liquidity down the road, especially if prices come back down.
When it comes to quality decision-making, it's always good to have a list of important items and goals to accomplish. These are the top priorities that Tina tells me farmers and ranchers should be paying particularly close attention to.
So, if you wanted to put together a top 5 list of things to do, the first one's, getting your financials in order. And that doesn't mean waiting till the night before tax planning, but really keeping those up to date, keeping your balance sheet up to date, working on a cash flow that makes sense that you can use. And that you can translate into step number 2, which is knowing your cost of production. Because when you know what your costs are, you can be prepared to make those decisions, whether that's marketing the crop or locking in input prices. And it's really important to understand that, as many farms as we work with, that no two people's cost of production are the same. So this isn't information that you can get from the coffee shop or from the newsletter or even Twitter, which seems to be the famous place to get news these days. But it's going to be different for every farm. And that seems crazy because everybody's doing the same thing, but it's different. So know yours. And then protect your liquidity. That's number 3, is just make sure you're watching that and making sure that the decisions that you make today and then throughout this year are decisions that are not going to impact that liquidity for the next 5 to 7 years, like making purchases and borrowing the money. Those are things that will affect your liquidity in the long term. So make sure that that's the right choice for your farm. And then pay those taxes. Again, it's a hard thing to think about, but really will help your operation get in a more financially sound place. And again, we don't want to pay more than we have to, but this might be a good opportunity to pay tax at a pretty low rate before any changes might come through. And then number 5, again, was just stay informed. Right. And again, I think if the last 12 months have taught us anything, is you better be prepared for anything that might come in a very short time frame. We've got a lot of programs that have had to been applied for and done in a really quick format. So be prepared for whatever might come and be ready for that.
With an industry that will inevitably have its ups and downs, outcomes will usually boil down to being prepared and flexible in order to make the most informed and profitable decisions for your operation. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thanks, Bill. We've got more from Tina on this topic over on the Market Journal website. Be sure to give it a look. Moving over to markets now, and according to this week's USDA Crop Progress Report, Nebraska's corn crop remains strong, with 84% rated good to excellent. Soybeans look even better, coming in at 87% good to excellent. But look to the north and the Dakotas. Drought conditions are more widespread, with good to excellent ratings in the 40s. Central Valley Ag's Luke Beckman joined me on Thursday to talk the latest crop conditions and what's moving the markets.
In the Nebraska footprint, we saw corn conditions unchanged for the state of Nebraska, really one of the better states according to the USDA. Our immediate backyard in northeast Nebraska continues to look good for the most part. Certainly some extreme heat this week was showing up in terms of how the crop looked, condition-wise. That'll be the big question for next Sunday night. How do ratings look at that point in time? We'd probably expect a step backwards week over week as we see those ratings a week from now.
I want to draw our attention to the North Dakota soybean number. Only 24% of the crop rated good to excellent. And we've talked before on the show about how tight soybean acres are anyway. So how big of an issue is this low condition number so early in the growing season for that soybean market?
It's important, especially for corn as well. You asked specifically about North Dakota. As we think about where acres are coming from this year, the Dakotas really were, a big part of growth in the corn and soybean basket, really, as you look at those two acres together. So it's big, Troy. It's just what percent of our total production is represented by North Dakota, South Dakota, and other key portions. But don't forget about Iowa. That's really been a dry state. There's even been dry pockets in Nebraska, and all you have to do is look at percent of historical precip for the month of June. You can look at soil moisture ratings, as a percentile over the last 100 years to know that current conditions are dry. So we're just going to need some just-in-time precip, during key portions here in July and August to really get us to trend yields. That's what that's what the balance sheet's going to show. Until the USDA acknowledges that we might have, some issues. So the pressure is on to produce good crops this growing season.
Soybean crush on the low end of estimates for May. That's 4 straight months now where we've fallen below expectations there. Should this be expected with an aggressive export and crush season earlier in the marketing year?
Yeah, that's a great question, Troy. And I think you set it up really well there. We have been a little disappointing with the NOPA crush numbers the last several months coming in below expectations. This last week, 163.5 million for the month of May. That was 1.6 below expectations. I think you're onto something a little bit there. We had record crush months, really September through January this past year. And then February, if you remember, we had that cold blast kind of sink into the U.S. and that really shut some things down. I think part of the other story that's going on here too, in addition to the availability issues maybe that you've alluded to with soybean carryout being so tight, is soybean run rates or crush rates, were a record in 9 out of 12 months last year in 19 and 20. And that carried over into this year, where I had just mentioned September through January, we set individual monthly crush rate records. So these plants have been running, they've been running all out with good crush margins and the current environment we've been in. So they're just at a point where they do need some maintenance. And so you've seen some of that happen where we've had maintenance periods lately that have probably extended a little bit longer than they normally would like. You're also dealing with supply chain issues in terms of parts as they talk about repairs and getting those plants back online. So that's part of the story, maybe hidden in some of the numbers, but the overall environment for crush is still very positive, even though crush margins have dipped a little bit from where they were earlier this marketing year.
At the end of the month, acres and stocks report from the USDA. Are there any specific things you'll be watching for that could be market movers?
Yeah, it's a big day. So a couple things to watch. Really want to look at that stocks number in the stocks report. The focus will probably be on acres, but want to watch the stocks report to see what corn feed usage can look like for this old crop yet. The current estimate that the USDA has for feed usage really would require that the second half of this marketing year feed usage would have to be down, over 20% versus last year if we're going to hit that number. On the acreage side, we know, or the market expects, acres are up. The question is how much. A lot of your private estimates that work and deal in the field probably expect that number around 94. We've seen estimates as high as 96, even close to 97 on the corn side of things, and bean acres 89 to 90 million. And then not long behind that, you get the July WASDE report, which is going to incorporate those acres, and the USDA will have a chance to update yield if they so choose. But higher acres and a trend line yield, if they don't change it or bring it down with this drier weather, the markets are going to struggle with that.
And let's end things today with any marketing or risk management advice that you'd like to mention that we haven't talked about.
These markets are dynamic. They're volatile. We're in a weather market. Our advice to producers is take a check of where you are percent sold on your old crop and your new crop positions, and make sure you're comfortable going into June 30th. Those reports could give us bullish information. It could be bearish. I think you really just have to be comfortable with your position going in. We feel producers need to have some of this new crop protected at these levels going into that report. If you're in a dry land situation and you're unsure about production and aren't ready to commit to sales, that's the right environment for put options or some sort of defensive strategy that doesn't lock you into, cash contracts. So have something on the books, protect some of these prices. These markets can move quickly, and we're at great levels. So it's a great environment to be producing commodities.
Next week, we'll be joined by Darren Fessler from Lakefront Futures and Options. If you have a question you'd like for me to ask him, email us or get in touch on social media, and I'll pass your question along. Next up, McCarty Family Farms has been around the dairy business for more than a century. Today, Ken, Dave, Mike, and Clay McCarty own and operate farms in Nebraska and Kansas. That's where they milk about 13,000 cows, operate a 2,000 head heifer yard, and grow 4,000 acres of crops. You can learn more about the good work McCarty Farms is doing in the June issue of Nebraska Farmer. Moving on now, and according to data collected by Purdue University, 35 grain entrapment cases occurred in 2020. That's down 8% from 2019, but what if a farmer didn't have to go into the grain bin at all? Well, thanks to new technology, that reality might be closer than you think. Market Journal's Maddie McIntosh has the story.
Grain bins may look safe from the outside, but they can pose a deadly risk to those working inside them. In 2019, the Daily Yonder reported grain entrapments in the U.S. rose by 27%, with deaths rising by 53% that same year. Realizing that lives are at risk, two young Nebraskans formed a partnership which will help keep humans out of grain bins altogether.
So actually we were approached by our farmer friend who saw us, kind of tinkering around with robots and asked us one day, he said, I never want to climb into a grain bin again, and I have some kids that I know that one day might have to climb into a grain bin. I never want them to have to go through that. So I want you guys to build me a robot so that no one ever has to go through that process ever again.
The Grain Weevil Robot is a grain bin safety and management robot. It scurries across the top of the grain using auger-based propulsion, and this allows us to manipulate the grain so we can break up clumps and bridges, level the bin, and help with the efficient extraction of the grain when you're taking it out.
The two recent engineering graduates designed the robot to be small and streamlined, allowing it to move freely about the bin.
Our small 18-inch by 20-inch robot allows us to be mobile inside of the bin. Unlike other solutions, which are big, heavy, attached to every bin, expensive products, we're able to move from bin to bin. We're able to do more complex tasks, like breaking up specific clumps or fixing small areas inside of a bin.
So we started kind of with a lot of off-the-shelf devices. So we hit the ground running with that, and then slowly I've been transitioning over to our own proprietary software. So it's been about a year-long process to get that all shifted over.
So right now we're able to do temperature as well as ambient humidity. We're working towards some more grain quality measurements, but those are more complex, and so we'll be working through those this summer.
So right now we have a remote control that we just drive manually, but in the future we hope to have it be completely autonomous. The farmer only has to drop the robot into the bin and then just walk away and let it run.
Other future changes for the robot include more data sampling options, as well as cameras so farmers can see what's happening inside their bins. Both Zane and Ben see the technological changes happening in the industry and are optimistic about the Grain Weevil's future.
We're pushing as fast as we can. We're really passionate to get this thing out there as quickly as possible to help the farmers.
So in the future, hopefully in the next 10 years, we see every farm as having some sort of grain bin management system on it, and we hope to be that system. So we hope that the Grain Weevil is on grain bins all across the United States and hopefully eventually internationally.
I think that grain bins and farming in general is becoming more tech advanced, and I think there's going to be a big push on the safety as well as the management side, because we can improve the storage process that we currently have. And I think that there's going to be tools that will help and aid the farmer in that process. And I think that we have something that can definitely help that process. And what we always say is farmers know a lot about what's going on inside of their bin. They have sensors, they have the ability to learn, I have a hot spot, I have something going on, but now we're creating something that can safely do something about those problems.
The Grain Weevil is currently going into testing at 5 different farms across the nation. Zane and Ben hope these tests will allow them to fine-tune the robot to work faster and more efficiently in the future. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Maddie McIntosh.
Thanks, Maddie. Best of luck to the Grain Weevil team. Great story. Next up, for growers looking for a way to control glyphosate-resistant weeds, several Dicamba products offer a cost-effective solution to do just that. But if applied incorrectly or under the wrong conditions, spray drift can occur. That could result in neighboring fields suffering Dicamba injury, with those property owners rarely being compensated for their losses. UNL agricultural law professor Terry Centner has been researching the topic of Dicamba injury compensation and joined me on the show to discuss how it might work and why it's needed.
Well, compensation is the issue. Obviously, if your property is injured, you want to be compensated. Under federal law and under state pesticide law, no compensation results. Instead, you have to use tort litigation. In other words, you have to file a lawsuit.
Let's talk about Dicamba compensation. What would a program like that look like to you?
Well, I feel that a compensation program is an alternative for this issue, that we'd have a state government, the agency in charge of pesticides, put together a program whereby all purchasers of Dicamba products would pay a fee on the product, and the monies from these fees would go into a compensation fund. And then if a property owner was injured, the property owner would have samples of their plants tested to see if there's a dicamba residue on the plants. And if they are, they could file a claim.
Okay, so let's say that I am a property owner who feels that my plants were damaged by dicamba applications. What would I do? What's my recourse?
Okay, so after you have proof that there's damage from dicamba, you would file the claim, and you'd have to follow this up with proof of damages, that you lost yields or you lost the benefits of plants, whatever it might be. And so you would have to prove damages. So all of this would be on the claimant, the person filing the claim, and they would pay for all those expenses. Once they had submitted damages, then the state agency would go and calculate if the damages made sense, if they were right, if they'd used data that made a lot of sense, and they would determine whether or not how much of the claim should be paid.
You know, one thing with a compensation program like this, people are going to say, who's going to pay for this? And you know, you would think maybe there would be potential issues with that. What do you say to that?
Well, the payment would be from the fees on dicamba products. So what we're trying to do is persons that want to use a dangerous pesticide should pay for the damages, rather than have innocent property owners next door suffering injuries that they aren't paid for. So the dicamba producers won't like this idea of a program. I mean, they're using dicamba for profits, and this will eat into their profits. However, the neighbors that are adversely affected will like the program because their property rights are being protected. And so in my mind, it's a question of property rights. If you own property, do you have the right to have it safe from your neighbor's pesticides? And I think the fair answer is yes, it should be safe.
And what has been the farmers' reaction to this? What do they say, and how difficult would it be to implement something of this magnitude for all the parties involved?
Well, it would be difficult. It's a major undertaking to put together this program. The state would have to do it. There would have to be a board of directors over the program. There would have to be personnel hired to implement the program. This would be costly, and obviously this would diminish the returns for users of dicamba. At the same time, it does try to get at an equitable problem, a fairness problem, whereby we have a lot of property owners that are suffering damages and not being paid for those damages.
Interesting topic, and definitely one we'll continue to follow. Time now for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, our air conditioners were getting quite the workout this week. What is on tap for the week ahead?
Well, Troy, certainly was a scorcher out there this week with the worst of the conditions Wednesday and Thursday across the state when we've seen temperatures well into the upper 90s to the 105, 106 readings. Thankfully, a little bit of our dew point temperatures come up somewhat, but we still had quite a bit of dry air over the region, so we just seen some scattering of convection on occasion move through the region, with the most extensive area of precipitation development was Thursday night across Iowa, and some of that backbuilded into northeastern Nebraska and then of course spread toward the south. Now as we go forward in time, with the drought monitor showing expansion of abnormal dryness into much of the northern one-third of the state and some severe drought in extreme northeastern Nebraska, precipitation is going to become very critical as the crop starts using more water going forward. There are opportunities for moisture, and a cooling trend looks to be in store, at least from the model standpoint. We mentioned that last week. It looks like it's a little bit more certain in regards to the forecast going forward. So let's take a look at the upper mountains and see how things might progress. And the first thing we'll draw your attention to is that cooler air that sagged into the state basically is locked into the northern half of the plains, kind of a zonal flow with a little bit of energy that's coming out of southern Montana. At the surface, we have low pressure over the Black Hills, and in terms of moisture, we're getting some moisture moving up to the north. So we do get some scattered convection this morning, and we start to see some of that maybe possibly break out as we go into the overnight hours into tomorrow. As this trough starts to sag and bring much cooler air into our region, we should start to see our temperatures drop back into the low to upper 80s. Low pressure at the surface lines up from the Texas Panhandle all the way up to the northeast. We see that overrunning precipitation, particularly over Iowa, northeastern Nebraska once again, and I think some of that will sag toward the south, particularly on Monday, and we should see some of that moving to southeastern Nebraska during the overnight hours into the early morning. As high pressure starts to build toward the south and the east, that will push during the day all of that precipitation much toward the central and eastern Corn Belt. We start to see ridging taking place to the west of us on Tuesday. We're still in the northwest flow, so we're going to see the cooler conditions across the eastern part of the state. We still should be in the 80s. We might actually breach the 90-degree mark in the southwest as low pressure over the Texas Panhandle sets up. Most of the moisture that would be evected north is being robbed by the tropical system that's going to be moving on shore over Louisiana. And then on Wednesday, we see that ridge build up, and so we should return back to the 90s across most of the southern half of the state, probably upper 80s across the north. Low pressure over North Dakota really doesn't have any moisture to work with, as the main upper air low is situated over the northwestern Great Lakes. Now on Thursday, another wave starts to try to push southward along with a southerly flow through the southern jet stream out of the southwest. So low pressure sets up basically over some portions of north central Kansas. That should allow some overrunning precipitation. Right now, the GFS model wants to keep that precipitation just to the east of Nebraska, but you'll notice a high pressure starts to form over the south central United States on Friday. That should give us some wraparound moisture on the backside, and as that system pushes toward the east, we may see much more better moisture feeds. So they're showing the interaction of a front pushing southward with that moisture developing over northern Nebraska. As we go farther out, the cool trend continues in the GFS model for next Thursday to the following Tuesday and may extend even into the end of the month. High pressure aloft over the west keeps us warm, and in terms of precipitation, with the draw in the east, we do see much better precipitation probabilities across much of the western and central Corn Belt.
Thanks, Al. Finally today, UNL is hosting East Campus Discovery Days and Farmers Market 3 Saturdays this summer. Come out to enjoy vendors, food trucks, live music, and a whole lot more. The Market Journal team even has a booth with games and prizes too, so be sure to come out and say hello. The first East Campus Discovery Days was this past weekend, but you can still come out on July 10th and August 14th. Lots of fun, and it's all happening on UNL's East Campus. That's going to do it for this week's show. If you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app, or you can follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. Next week, we'll tell you some of the latest research into the troublesome weed Palmer amaranth. Plus, Brad Lubin is here to discuss farm income and safety net programs. Hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching, and to all the dads out there, have a great Father's Day.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.